welcome back to Rolling Driftless. In today's video, I'm going to share a better way to plan your motorcycle trips. The snow's still on the ground here, looking out the window, just wishing that riding season would come. Can't come soon enough. What a great time to share how I'm going about planning the trips and what I've learned over the past few years that hopefully will help you as well. In today's video, we're going to cover a combination of Google Maps, Google MyMaps, which may be new to some of you, and Rever. There's certainly other planning tools out there, things like InRoute, MRA, Route Planner, other paid tools. But I want to just share what I'm doing. Let's get into it. All right, so let's talk about Google Maps. What's Google Maps good at? Where does it fall short? Let's start with some basics. I think everybody probably is familiar with these basics, but it'll give us a foundation for what we discuss in the video. So looking at the map here, let's say we wanted to go to the town of Arcadia. If I could type, we'd be in good shape. All right, so there we have Arcadia. Let's say we want to come from the town of Durand. And Google will go lay out a route between the two. And it'll lay it out as the fastest route. The fastest route isn't always the route we want to take on a motorcycle. We want to take the scenic route. We want to hit the twisties. We want to try some other things. So one of the things you can do if you're just looking at Google Maps online, as many of you are familiar, is you can drag the route. And you can drop a point and adjust it to that. The problem is Google treats that as a temporary visual point. It doesn't update it like a waypoint. So when you save this and send it to somebody, especially on a mobile phone, it's just going to recalculate. So what you think you're looking at or what you are looking at on the map is not what you're going to get when you send it to a phone, and it recalculates and it kind of defaults back to its past route. As an alternative, you can add destinations. So let's just say we were adding in the town of Ernie. And let's put that up in between those 2 points. And further, let's see, let's tell it we want to go through, maybe it's already going through it. I was going to say Montana. No, let's add Montana here, which is a small town in Wisconsin, not the state of Montana. And put that in order. So now you can see Google has adjusted the route. We can save this. We can copy a link for that here. If you click here, it will copy it to the clipboard. I could paste that somewhere, send it to somebody, and use that for navigation. There is no guarantee that Google's not going to reroute that at some point and decide there's a better route that's faster. So if you're going with a group of people, you run into that, multiple people on multiple phones, Google may calculate different routes for them. We've certainly had that happen on trips. The other flaw here is if you want to add these waypoints in, like we added 2 waypoints along the way, and you get a total of 10 waypoints in a trip, including the start and end points. So if you're planning a whole day of riding in the twisties, you don't get enough points to really map out a very detailed route. So you wind up doing it in segments. So it's suboptimal for that. What's Google good at? Google's really good at, trying to find the fastest route. It's good at traffic and letting you know where traffic and accidents might exist and rerouting you around that. It's good for point A to point B destinations when you care less about the route and more about getting there. So great for automobile travel, not so much for motorcycle trips. Google doesn't know anything about scenic or twisty roads. It treats all public roads the same in that way. It will differentiate. I mean, obviously, as most of you know, you can turn off highways or have it avoid highways, but that'll essentially just avoid 4-lane highways. In the case of riding the Driftless, we want to avoid the 2-lane highways in a lot of cases. Although there's some very nice 2-lane highways, we like getting off on the county roads and the named roads and really finding some of the back roads that are beautiful motorcycle routes. Google's not going to help you with that. That's sort of Google in a nutshell. I won't dwell on it because I think everybody's familiar with Google, and if you've tried to plan a motorcycle route, you're familiar with some of these shortcomings. So in the past, one of the things I've done is create spreadsheets, especially for group travel. And in those spreadsheets, given some of the limitations of planning long routes in Google Maps, would plan it in segments, a day at a time, and in cases like you see here, breaking that day down into segments between gas stops. And in doing so, you kind of overcome the limitation of 10 waypoints in a route, can also overcome, for the most part, if you're sticking to highways and route to getting somewhere, you can overcome the limitation of Google rerouting you. So in this case, what you see here is each day, and then the top line here is a link to a Google map for the route for that entire day. Underneath that were 4 segments of the day, and at each gas stop I might send this link out to the group. This was a rather large group, and everybody would have that link, be able to pull it up on their phone and see where the next stop was going to be. In case we got separated, we could meet up at that next stop. So let me show you what that looks like on a map. So as I clicked on one of the day links in that spreadsheet, and it brings me to Google Maps, and it shows me the route for the day. If I had clicked on the link right below that, which was the first segment for the day, it brought me to that segment. So basically, in this point, it was from where we left in the morning of the second day, down to a gas stop. And as you can see here, Google's already suggesting alternate routes, albeit in this case a couple that were a little bit longer. But any point, if you've got this out to 20 people on their phones, at some point somebody's going to get routed down a different path, right? So again, and it's a lot of work to maintain these links and to plan it this way, and you really don't get a visual aspect of what the whole trip looks like. You get a whole spreadsheet full of links to travel, but it is one way, I know a lot of people do this, to coordinate trips with a group. Again, some flaws with this approach is Google, again, not good for the twisty routes once we get to our destination. That's where I tended to use Rever in the past and still do. We'll get to that in a bit here, and plan out the detailed routes and the fun stuff, the destination, once we get there. And those two could be copied into a line item in a spreadsheet and take you to Rever. Well, one of the challenges with Rever is a lot of people don't have or use the Rever app. They're not familiar with it, so that provided some challenges in that way. Although we are trying to encourage that with more members of our group, just because of the things you get with Rever that you don't. So next, let's get into something that people are probably less familiar with here, Google MyMaps. So if you haven't used MyMaps, it's a very cool tool that Google provides. It's also free for planning trips. It gives you a very nice visual and a lot of flexibility. It also has some shortcomings, like every tool. It's very good at the planning aspect and the visualization of the entire trip. Not so good for actually navigating, but we've got a workaround for that as well. So let's dig into it. So you can get to this by just typing mymaps.google.com. And I pull up, as you can see, I have several My Maps here. I've just really started using this within the last few months. And the one we're going to look at today is the Southwest Colorado motorcycle trip. I have it open another tab here, so let's go to that. So one of the ways I start out with My Maps is something that gives you layers. It gives you up to 10 layers. And I usually start with the first layer, and I start by making POIs. And you can make all sorts of POIs, and you can categorize them on, I don't know what the limit is, but it's a very large number of POIs that you can add here. And the POIs could be everything from things you want to stop to see, hotels, accommodations, restaurants you want to stop to eat at. You can color code and use different symbols for all of those. In the case of this one here, I left the symbol all the same. Obviously, you can go into each type and do something different so you get more of a visual on the map. But one of the things by doing this, and you really just find these things by coming up here. I mean, let's just say that we wanted to go to Independence Pass, which is not on this trip. Independence Pass pops up. And then actually, once it pops up here, I can say add it to the map. It will also add that to the map. And as I zoom out, that's now a point amongst all these other points. We actually went to Independence Pass last year, so in this case, I'm going to remove that one from the map. So I don't want to see that, but you get the idea. It's really easy to add points of interest to the map. So you get all these things on the map, and then you start to visualize a route. How do you want to link these together? What road segments do you want to go do? And there's a number of resources out there for finding the best motorcycle road segments. One I use is Rever. Again, we'll get into Rever in a little bit, but I'll look at Rever. It uses something called Butler Maps segments. For those of you not familiar with it, Butler Maps is long published paper maps of some of the greatest motorcycle roads, categorized and some of the best riding parts of the country. And Rever has partnered with them to show the Butler map segments on the map. So it's a great tool for finding awesome motorcycle roads in parts of the country that you're less familiar with. So a combination of finding these waypoints and places I want to stop and then looking at the Butler maps, then I start to build in a road. In the case of what you see down below here, you get up to 10 layers. So what I tended to do was use a layer per day. Or in the case of coming and going, I did a driving map from, let me zoom out here a little bit, from Wisconsin out to Colorado. So we were doing that over the course of a couple days, just because I was limited to the 10 layers and we had enough days on in Colorado that I needed to use one day out and one day back. I'll spare you the details of that, but we'll get into some of the days in Colorado and show the details of how you create a layer. So if I pick the first day in Colorado and zoom back into it here, you'll see that we were leaving Colorado Springs in the morning. We'll have the address of our hotel in, and then going up to Pikes Peak, and then from there working our way down across to South Fork, setting up for the next few days of riding that we wanted to do. But you can have, I believe it's up to 10, at least 10 points in each one of these layers for the day. And for someplace like Colorado, I found that sufficient for planning a day's route. It's almost a little easier in some ways to plan in Colorado than it is in the Driftless area of Wisconsin, because it's such a spider of roads. In Colorado, there's only so many mountain passes or ways over the mountain, right? So it's easier with 10 waypoints to lay out a day than it is to lay out a complex day in a region like the Driftless region, where there are so many road options that are great options if you're trying to pick a particular one. So again, you can kind of lay this out, and as I kind of go back to the map and add in, I'm going to do it from the bottom here because it'll expand out better. I can add each day of the route back in, and now you start to see what the trip looks like. In fact, I can add the trip out back in too. So now you see what the whole trip looks like. We took a very boring route out because our goal for this year is just to bolt out there and spend the time that we have focused in Colorado and Utah. So now you start to get a real visual for what the trip looks like, and I kind of go back and forth between this and Rever to pick these very best routes, and kind of zooming in, figuring out what the day looks like, where you want to wind up the next day, and just kind of working out the whole trip that way. But I love the fact that you get a visual. You don't get this with the spreadsheet. So let's do a new map here, and just to give you an idea of what this might look like. And let's just take an area. Let's just start in Colorado again, since we were playing around with that. And again, if you were doing this, you could just take this untitled layer and call it interesting stops. And within that, you could say, look, let's use the Pikes Peak example again. I want to stop at Pikes Peak, Colorado, and add that to my map. I want to stop at Mount Blue Sky, previously called Mount Evans, and I want to add that to the map. And let's just say, let's add one more. Let's just say I wanted to go to Estes Park and add that to the map. So you see how easy it is to start adding things to the map. And then again, you can change the icon or the color of those so you can differentiate between, lodging and restaurants and cool things that you want to see. If you actually want to add directions, a layer for that, you go up under the search here and set add directions. Pops up, it'll pick up Estes Park is the last thing. You can change it to whatever you want. And so you wanted to go from Estes Park down to Georgetown. because you were going to pick up Guanella Pass up over, which is a great ride, by the way, from Georgetown, going out of Georgetown. Did that one last year. And it maps in that route. And from there, you can start messing around with this route. And this one happens to take a scenic byway down through there that's a beautiful route. And again, your other options in Colorado are kind of limited between those two places unless you're going down a canyon and along the East Range a little bit and back up another canyon. But you get the idea, and you can build up to 10 points in each one of these days. So, I mean, what we've done here is begun to build out a day of riding, right? In fact, if we wanted to add one more point to that and make it Mount Blue Sky, we could add a point there, and it'll pick it up real quickly as I start to type it because it's already in my list of interesting stops. And I can say, wait, now I want to stop at Mount Blue Sky before I get to Georgetown, so you can reorder them. Oops. I had to enter first, I think. And it reorders the points. So pretty cool stuff all in all. So again, the benefits of this, the visual planning for the trip. The other thing you can do with this is, you can share these My Maps so everybody can see that. You can actually collaborate on it if you shared it, so multiple people can be involved in the planning and adding places they want to stop and making suggestions about the trip. And then when it comes time to do the trip, everybody's got this map. If you pull up, and I can add a segment here to the video that shows what it looks like to pull this up on your phone. And if you pull this up on your phone, you will see this track line. You can show layers. You could show the layer for a particular day. What it will not do is help you with turn-by-turn navigation. It will be a track line on your phone that you can follow, and you can tell if you're on the intended route or not. So not too bad. If you're used to following track lines and kind of paying attention, it's actually works out pretty well. In fact, I like to do that more than turn-by-turn directions in a lot of cases. Occasionally, you'll miss a turn because you're not paying attention to the track line on your nav. That's the flaw with that. But all in all, pretty cool, but maybe a little less optimal for actually navigating. So what are some options for that? One of the things you can do is if you go up to the top here and click these three dots, is you can export to KML or KMZ. A lot of you might have heard of GPX files, which is a set of data basically that you can use to pass routes back and forth between different apps or mapping apps. KML is a similar thing. We won't get too deep into that. But if I say export KML, I could do the entire map, or I could go in and say just export Colorado Springs to South Fork and export as a KML and download, and it would download a KML file. Later, we can then go import this. I'll leave that there, and we'll go import that into Rever in the next segment. So I'll show you how you can do the planning here, export the day segments as KML files, and then import them into Rever for actually navigating or further refining your day segments. So let's just summarize what we get with MyMaps. You get massive customization. You get the layers. You can separate your day. You get the visual for the whole trip. You get collaborative planning. What you don't get is native turn-by-turn directions. You don't get offline support. No real-time updates. You're still limited to 10 stops per layer, and you really can't edit it on a mobile device to speak of. So it shows up as a map or a map segment. But again, I find it very useful for planning and a lot more interesting to look at to see what the trip's going to look like than staring at a bunch of line items in a spreadsheet. When you're sharing that with people that didn't do the planning, it just doesn't resonate with them as to what the trip's going to look like. So next we'll get into Rever and how we use Rever for feeding some of this planning process as well as navigating. All right, so next up, let's talk about Rever. Rever is an app that's available online. It's also available for iPhones and Android phones, and it's a mapping app. but it is optimized for motorcycle travel, much like InRoute or MRA, Route Planner, a couple other ones that exist. Rever helps you map to more twisty, interesting, scenic roads, and there's a couple really cool features in Rever that we'll talk about here as we go. So let's kind of go back to the example we used a little bit ago when we started with Google Maps, and we were looking at mapping a route from Durand down to Arcadia. So get that kind of centered on the map, and let's just say we're going to start in Durand. And we want to go to Arcadia again. Wisconsin version of Arcadia. And it'll lay in a route, similar to what Google did. And you go, well, that's not very interesting. It's running the highways. One of the cool features of Rever is instead of A-B routing, you can back out here and say, show me the twisty routing. Now this twisty routing does require the Pro subscription. The base functionality of Rever you can use free, but there are certain functionalities, some of them aren't very desirable functionality, quite honestly, that does require a subscription, and that's basically $40 a year is what I pay for Rever. So for the amount I use it, it's the cost of my wife and I going to lunch somewhere, right? So not really a big deal if it's something you find you use. But you see what it did as soon as I did the twisty routing is it took me down a different path, and it hit a bunch of the twisty roads in the Driftless region. Pretty good. Very interesting. Maybe not exactly what I wanted yet, just because I know those roads. So I'm going to back this out in this case, go back to A-B routing. And I'm going to use something called the Butler motorcycle map segment. So as I mentioned earlier, Butler Maps has created maps all over the country for a long time. And one of the things they do is maps, motorcycle maps, showing some of the best rated roads, and they rate them G1, G2, G3 for how great the motorcycle roads are in a region. So if you're traveling somewhere that you know has great roads, but you're not familiar with them, it's an awesome tool to find the very best roads for your trip. Well, they've partnered up with Rever, and those are integrated right into Rever. So I can click on, turn on the G1, G2, and G3 layers, and you start to see the colored segments appear here. They're some of the very best roads. So then you can just go drag the line and say, well, I want to go down that section. And then I want to pick up this section down in here too. And I also want to pick up this, so you kind of get the idea that you can start just adding pieces to this to get it to pick up some of the most interesting. Let's just say we're going to go with that for now. And what it did is add a waypoint for each of those. If you want to really get accurate with this, you zoom in, and when you're zoomed in, just kind of place all your points directly on the line. It'll result in fewer problems later. I'll spare you doing that, but you can kind of clean up your route, and you get a really nice route. And in this case, it used 5 points. Instead of 10 points in Google, I get 25 points. So in 25 points, I can lay out a pretty complex day route and pick up as many Rever segments as I want to. And it's just a great tool for planning to be able to see roads in that area. So yeah, if I backed out here for a minute, well, let's just say we wanted to save that one, and then we'll do something else. So if I said that was my complete route that I was looking for, I could say done. I could give it a name, a description, a ride date. You can have various motorcycles in here and then save. In this case, I'm going to cancel out of that one. I don't want to save that in my space. I'll lose my changes, yes. Let's go back out here just to give you a sense for what Colorado looked like. Again, not every segment, not every state in the country is laid out, but look at the Driftless region of Wisconsin here, how well they've done laying out all of the awesome roads that are in this area. It's certainly a hidden gem in the country that you don't know exists unless you have Rever and Butler Maps. Then you do. But like when we were planning our trip for Colorado, I would pull this up and get an idea of what passes I wanted to go over. Like this is Independence Pass going over into Aspen, and this is Cottonwood Pass. So I knew I wanted to hit, certain passes along the way and get out here and hit in the right spot for the $1 Million Highway. That's down this way. Here's the $1 Million Highway. So very cool for finding some of the best roads in an area you're less familiar with. So let's zoom back out, go over here to Wisconsin again. So what does it allow you to do? As you build a bunch of rides, you can say, show me my rides. And in this case, I used a naming convention. So I'm going to say, show me my planned rides. It will also track your rides if you're running it while you're rolling down the road. And I'm going to say, look, show me all my rides that start with CO3, which sort of my third trip to Colorado. And I wind up with day 1, day 2, day 3, day 1 through 7 here. And those were actually routes that I planned in Google MyMaps, as we looked at before, while kind of consulting Rever as I did it to pick up some of the best roads, and then bringing them back to Rever and renaming them via that KML file. So let's look at what that will look like if we wanted to do that. Again, let's go back out here. And if we were going to upload a GPX file, let me go over here and grab, you won't be able to see my other screen here, but let me grab this, not GPX file, the KML file, sorry. I'll bring the KML file over for Colorado. It's loading that. It brings me out, and here is day 1 in Colorado that we exported from Google My Maps and re-imported into Rever. So pretty cool. And then I would use this I would, hit done, save it, back what I'd previously done, save that as Colorado day 1. And before I go on a trip like this, I'll favorite each of the days for that trip so they show up I can have them show up essentially at the top of the list, and then bring them up and either follow the routes on my phone or on my nav system in CarPlay. So very, very cool. The other thing you can do here is there's something called communities. These are good for sharing. I'll just show you some of my communities, a couple that I set up. So this rolling driftless rides, this is a bunch of rides that I saved over the last year or so, and there's pages and pages of them here in the Driftless, and I'll make them available to people if they want access to the rides in the Driftless region. You're coming up here on a trip or something, and want to at least look at some of the rides I've had and decide if they look interesting to you. You're welcome to them. Again, there's quite a few pages of them. Looks like 10 pages of rides here, so so that's one possibility. The other possibility, if I go backwards here, just one screen, we go to the Colorado rides. This is a group I marked private. Again, I've been allowing access for people that request it, but this was a community I set up for basically planning these trips to Colorado. And this one happens to be kind of a mix of last year and this year in this community. So they're kind of all mixed together in here. But again, 4 pages of rides in Colorado. And I've shared these with a small number of people that have, searched and come across them and requested that. So very cool to be able to collaborate within these communities. And I think we're just, starting to scratch the surface with the group in our area for collaborating and sharing rides that way. So very cool. I'm not going to get way into Rever, much deeper here. We could do a whole tutorial session on Rever and how cool it is. But, one of the things you might ask is like, well, gee, Rever looks pretty good. Why not just completely plan in Rever? The answer to that for me is I want to be able to visually see the whole trip. Rever's very good for planning a day route. You get up to 25 points, but if you're trying to lay the whole trip in, you would still wind up with, maybe a Rever route for each day. And you could do that, and you could organize them. What you sort of lose is that one visual with all of them showing on the screen. And I've certainly done that in the past where I'll just plan each day in Rever, and then maybe the links to the specific Rever routes go into a spreadsheet too. What I've been trying to do is to get away from that spreadsheet and to have the visual of Google My Maps, yet have Rever for, both riding and tracking rides as the navigation tool. So that's been the strategy. This will be the real first year where I've used that combination and started to avoid the spreadsheets. So, we'll see what the pros and cons are as we go forward. But some other things you don't really get in Rever is Rever's database of POIs, hotels, gas, restaurants is nowhere near what Google has. So again, the combined strategy works best. So let's do a little wrap up. Let's summarize the strategy here. The strategy starts with Google My Maps. This gives you the one-stop shop for visual planning, all the days of your trip, all your POIs, all of your hotels can be in here, your interesting restaurants you want to stop and try along the way. And you can collaborate. You can use share here to invite others to collaborate with you on the trip until you get it dialed in and you're ready to roll. Along the way when you're doing that, be sure to use the, pull up Rever and look at some of the Butler rated segments for G1, G2, G3 roads and incorporate those into your route. It's a great tool for finding roads in areas you're unfamiliar with. There's a lot of other good resources on the web too. I'll let you find some of those, or we'll leave those for another day. But certainly leverage Rever when building those routes in MyMaps. Also in Rever, then you bring them back as KML files, and you wind up with using Rever as your navigation tool, and you have a ride for each day in there, and they migrate back very simply and painlessly. So that's where I find Rever really comes into play nicely, is for that navigation side. Also, if you were planning in Google My Maps and in a particular day you ran into trouble with, only 10 waypoints within a given layer or a given day, after you come over to Rever, you can have up to 25 points. So you can certainly do some refining of your route after you bring it over to Rever. So. One other thing that I find useful, and it's like, how do you still use Google, regular Google when you're doing this? Well, there's a few use cases where I still bring up Google. One in the planning, this particular here is showing a street level view for the road going up to Pikes Peak. So if there was some area like this where you wanted to see what the asphalt conditions were like, or what the corners look like, or just how scary the road look. If that kind of road intimidates you, then the street level view is very helpful for getting an idea of what you're getting into in a given location. Very nice for that. The other thing I'll use Google Maps for is you're in a location and it's time to bail down. You got to find some gas, so you put in gas stations. You're all familiar with this in Google, and you can find the nearest gas station and head off to it. Or a storm's rolling in and you just time to just head for your hotel, abandon the route, and take the quickest path down to your hotel. You can put in your hotel address and get there. So that point-to-point navigation, I still prefer Google. But the primary two tools for planning are now Google Maps and Rever. And again, you can do this all in Rever, but I just find the visual parts of Google My Maps useful and interesting. So let me know what you think. I'm curious. Hopefully some of you find this video useful, and within a few weeks here we'll get back to some riding videos and get rid of the rest of the snow and get out there and ride. So hope you enjoyed it, and catch you on the next one. Thanks.